November 21st, we have 4 new Kobolds and Catacombs cards released. Playlist is in the top right if you want to check out some of the previous cards. Let's start with Druid's legendary weapon Twig of the World Tree, 4 mana 1/5 with the Death Rattle, gain 10 mana crystals. So this Death Rattle is like Astral Communion in that you not only gain 10 mana for that turn, but now you've ramped up to 10 mana crystals for the rest of the game. This is definitely an interesting card. The cost seems pretty reasonable. In terms of ways to ramp up to 10 crystals quickly, I don't think this card will often work until the later turn. You have to attack 5 times or use Medivh to destroy the Death Rattle, so I think more often than not, the weapon will probably break when you're around 7 to 10 mana. And ramping just a few crystals is probably not worth this card. But the real reward is getting to spend an extra 10 mana in a turn. The advantage that Twig has is you can already have the weapon equipped, so unlike Coon, you don't have to spend any mana that turn to get 10 more mana. Just make sure you spend the first 10 mana before destroying Twig, so you can actually spend the total 20 mana that turn. The Coon Aviana Twig combo is going to be crazy, 30 mana in one turn. The hype is real, but be warned because any combos with Twig are in danger. If your opponent is running Ooze, they can destroy Twig on their turn, and maybe they'll ramp you from 8 crystals to 10, but now you don't get to use the extra 10 mana on your turn. If any combos were to come out of this card, Ooze is going to be there to counter it. And because of this, and the fact that the card is too slow to be an effective ramp, I don't think this will be a competitive card. Like everyone else, I'm guessing in the early weeks, there's going to be a higher than average number of anti-weapon tech seen in the meta, and for this card, that means it's going to fall flat. Much like the Coon Aviana combo, you might see this big Druid deck around for a little bit, but I think it's just too inconsistent, slow, and easily countered to work. I still can't wait to see the cool combos on Reddit, and once the weapon tech dies down, I could see people ranking up on ladder using this really fun combo. I definitely wouldn't recommend crafting it, but if you do get it, you can still make a fun deck with it. Next is Rummaging Kobold, 3 mana 1/3 epic neutral with the battle cry, return one of your destroyed weapons to your hand. So if a weapon is destroyed in your hand by either an opponent's Ooze or using up the weapon's durability yourself, Rummaging Kobold will put that weapon in your hand to be played again. If multiple weapons have been destroyed in your hand, then it returns one of those weapons randomly. It's basically anti-weapon tech. Now for this card to be played in decks, this is how it has to work. Number 1, the deck has to be one of the new legendary weapons. Right now, all the weapons in the game are too underpowered for it to be worth spending 3 mana and the weapon cost. Even Ashbringer or Grave Vengeance aren't worth the mana, card slot, and time to put this card in your deck so you can play the weapon again. Number 2, the deck has to be slow enough. If there's an aggro deck that utilizes one of the weapons, they still can't play Rummaging Kobold because the card is so slow. I think it's even too slow to run in a tempo deck. And lastly, at number 3, the legendary weapon has to be so good and so important to the game plan that making sure you have the weapon is worth running this card. We don't know all the weapon legendaries yet, but so far I wouldn't bet Rummaging Kobolds will make it into many decks. I don't think a Luneth will be important enough to want another one. Dragon Soul could maybe run one Rummaging, but I imagine that as a tempo deck the card would be too slow. I don't think people will run Rune Spear, so no point in running this card. And maybe Twig is the best match so far for Rummaging Kobold because you could give yourself multiple chances at getting the 10 mana in a turn. Also, when Twig has been destroyed, running 2 Rummaging Kobolds would allow you to play one Twig and then play the other Twig to destroy that first Twig in order to gain 10 mana. But this card does give me flashbacks to the hype around Drukhari Enchanter, and I think Drukhari just illustrates how poorly costed minions, even if it's only 3 mana, might just be such a slow play that they often won't be viable. There's still 5 legendary weapons to go, so there's time to see if Rummaging Kobold will be able to find a home. Next is Zola the Gorgon, 3 mana 2/2 legendary neutral with the battle cry, choose a friendly minion, add a golden copy of it to your hand. I've actually switched my opinion about this card like 5 times, but I think I've come to like this card. It's a really simple design, but something that's not actually in the game right now. The closest thing is Shadowcaster and Rogue, but I think Zola the Gorgon is going to be used differently. Being a neutral legendary is important because it needs to cast a wide net in order to find a value control deck with a few big minions that the deck would benefit from playing more than once. The cost also lets you bounce this card, allowing you to get even more of a certain minion in just one turn. I suppose Zola will work in Quest Rogue, so you might as well put it in that deck, but I think this card really fits well in a Kazakus or other non-duplicate decks. The most popular right now is Highlander Priest, and this card can help you get duplicates of minions in a deck that doesn't allow them, and that's pretty good. My final consensus, if you have the card, you should try to fit it in a Kazakus deck, but if you don't, then you're probably okay not running it. This is a meme card. It gives you a golden minion, its name is a cheese joke, but I think this card is costed low enough to see playing decks that want 2 of a powerful minion, while at the same time it's not necessarily a key legendary that free players will have to craft in order to win. Next up is Spiteful Summoner, 6 mana 4/4 neutral epic with a battle cry, reveal a spell from your deck, summon a random minion with the same cost. So reveal kind of works like Joust, where it will pick a random spell from your deck, except the reward is it just spawns a random minion with the same cost. So I think on average you'll have to reveal a spell of 4 or more mana for this to be playable, because while the value of of a minion you'll get will vary. For 6 mana, you want to, on average, get 8/8 stats. So while the RNG will sometimes work for or against you, I think a random 4 or more costing minion is normally going to work for you. Another interesting thing about this card is revealing the spell will show the spell to your opponent. So at least early on in the expansion when people don't really know what they're playing, or at rank 20, revealing does give a little insight to your opponent on what type of deck you're playing. And speaking of decks, this card is actually really hard to fit into a deck. Even minion based decks like buffing paladins still run a good amount of 1 to 3 mana spells, and this card's value is too dependent on the spell you reveal to take a chance on getting a 1-drop minion. This card might work in Priest, especially Dragon Priest, who could run only expensive spells, ditching the lower costing ones, and instead using the early game dragon minions. I think for this card to work, it has to go into a deck that doesn't already run cheap spells, and the best deck I could think of is Firebat's Handlock from Ungoro. The deck's only spells are Doom, Twisting Nether, Hellfire, and Bloodbloom. Bloodbloom is a problem at 2 mana, so maybe if you only run one of those, your chances of revealing it would be slim, and maybe some more heal minions printed for Warlock if Blizzard is feeling friendly. I think this deck is the best home for Spiteful Summoner. I think it's a well-designed card. It's going to be hard to fit into a lot of decks, but I hope it finds its way into a competitive deck sometime in the future. And last up we have Seeping Oozling. 6 mana 5/4 rare hunter minion with the battle cry, gain the death rattle of a random minion in your deck. You know, I'm starting to see how a lot of the cards they reveal have a heavy emphasis on deck construction, and I kinda like it. So Oozling is a tough card for hunter. 6 mana seems like it's way too much for the 5/4 stat line. I understand that if you get the death rattle from a card like Rat Pack, then the cost would be pretty good. And hey, Meatwagon is actually pretty good for this card. But even getting the high main death rattle is just okay. I hate to take this card to an imaginary deck, but the only way I could see this working is if that big beast hunter I talked about yesterday, top right of the screen, allowed this card to work in that deck. Because the deck is only meant to pull big beasts onto your board, the deck allows you to run smaller non-beast minions, like Seeping Oozling. You could put in Katharina Winterwisp and Bowman as your only death rattle cards, but instead of having to draw them to get value, if you play Seeping Oozling, you gain a valuable death rattle and you make the cost of the card worth it. Because when your death rattle spawns an Ultra Sort, it's okay if a minion is a 6 mana 5/4. This is of course the ideal, and it still seems too clunky in my head for it to work. I think the truth is, this card sucks. If you put it in a Zoth deck, you're going to run a lot of death rattles, and they often won't be powerful enough to outweigh the cost of this card. If N'Zoth respawned to this minion, which it doesn't because the card gains the death rattle and doesn't start the game with it, then it could work. But I still don't see an Oozling working in a N'Zoth hunter that's stripped down only to the best death rattles. I think if my high-hoped big beast hunter is a deck, this card might work to spawn more big beasts. Or maybe it could work in a hunter egg deck, where the death rattle spawns a 5/5 or pulls a minion from your deck with 5 or less attack. I just think the card's stats and the death rattles in the game aren't good enough for this card to work, and it's going to take a miracle for this card to see play. Just like the possible miracle of Control Hunter. Well, that's all for today's cards. I'll be back tomorrow for more. Check out the playlist if you want to see my reviews on the other cards from this expansion, and subscribe if you want to hear my opinions as more cards come out. But until then, ta-ta.